The rain in Trat does not wash things clean. It just makes the rust bleed faster. I stood under the corrugated metal roof of the ferry terminal. The smell of low tide was thick in my throat. It tasted like salt and rotting crab. My shirt stuck to my back. My wallet felt light in my pocket. I watched the rusty ferry bobbing in the gray water. The engine coughed black smoke into the humid air. I was 32 years old. I was a founder of a company that once made headlines in TechCrunch. Now I was a ghost standing on a pier at the edge of the world. I watched the woman I thought was my salvation climb onto the back of a motorbike. The driver was young. He wore a faded football jersey. He did not look at me. He just revved the engine. The woman wrapped her arms around his waist. She pressed her face into his back. It was a gesture of intimacy I had paid thousands of dollars to earn. But for him, it was free. Her name was Fern. She was supposed to be carrying my child. She was supposed to be at the temple making merit for our future. Instead, she was laughing as the bike sped away into the rain. They played me like a fool. And I stood there and let them do it because I had already paid the admission fee. It started 3 months ago in a temple in Bangkok, Wat Suthat. I was wandering through the city like a sleepwalker. I'd just sold the IP of my failed startup for pennies on the dollar. I was burned out. I was cynical. I wanted something pure. I wanted the simple life I had read about on travel blogs. I saw Fern kneeling in front of a giant golden Buddha. She held a lotus flower. Her eyes were closed. She looked serene. She looked like she knew secrets about the universe that I had missed in my rush to burn venture capital. She was not wearing the tight dress of a working girl. She wore a white blouse and a long skirt. She looked like a teacher or a nurse. I sat on the floor behind her. I tried to copy her pose. My knees cracked. I felt like a clumsy tourist. When she finished praying, she turned and saw me. She smiled. It was not the predatory smile of the nightlife district. It was soft, kind. We walked out into the sunlight together. She spoke good English. She told me she came to the temple every day to make merit. She said her karma was heavy and she needed to clean it. I told her my karma was a disaster zone. She laughed. She did not ask for a drink. She did not ask for a phone number. She bought a cage with 2 small birds inside. She handed it to me. She told me to release them. She said it would bring me luck. I opened the cage. The birds flew up into the smog. I felt a lightness in my chest. I felt like I had done something good. I asked if I could buy her dinner. She hesitated. She said she was a good Buddhist girl. She did not go to bars. She did not drink alcohol. I told her I hated bars. I hated alcohol. I just wanted to eat rice and talk. We ate at a street stall. We sat on plastic stools. I told her about my life, about the code, about the investors, about the emptiness of the exit. She listened. She nodded. She told me money was an illusion. She said only merit was real. She said I was a good man with a lost spirit. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I felt like a king who had finally found a queen who did not care about his crown. We spent every day together. We did not go to the cinema or the mall. We went to temples. 9 temples in one day. I put gold leaf on statues. I put cash in donation boxes. I bought robes for monks. Fern told me how much to give. She said the more I gave, the more merit I would earn. I felt cleansed. I felt the cynicism peeling away. But there were signs. Chekhov had loaded his gun and left it on the table. The first sign was the phone calls. She always took them away from me. She spoke in a whisper. She said it was her village calling. Her mother was sick. Her brother needed help with the harvest. It sounded innocent. It sounded noble. The second sign was the document. One afternoon, we were at her apartment. It was small and sparse. A shrine in the corner took up half the room. I saw a paper on the table. It was in Thai. It looked official. It had a photo of a child attached. A boy, about 5 years old. I asked her who it was. She snatched the paper away. She said it was her nephew. She said she sponsored his education because his father was a bad man. She said it was part of her merit-making. The third sign was the cousin. He visited once when we were eating lunch. He was the man I would later see on the motorbike. He did not look like a cousin. He looked like a lover. He sat close to her. He ate from her plate. He looked at me with flat, dead eyes. Fern told me he was simple. She said he drove a taxi in the city. She gave him money from her purse. She said it was for gas. I ignored it all. I was invested. I had sunk my time and my emotion into this new version of myself. The spiritual Farang, the man of merit. To doubt her was to doubt my own redemption. Then she told me she needed to go home, to Trat. It was a province on the border of Cambodia, the end of the line. She said her mother was getting worse. She needed to care for her. I said I would come with her. I expected her to say no, to make an excuse, but she smiled. She said it would be good for me to see the real Thailand. Not the tourist trap, the real life. We took a bus, 5 hours of highway, then local roads. The landscape changed. The concrete turned to rubber plantations. The air got heavier. We stayed in a small guest house near the ferry terminal. It was not a resort. It was a transit point for backpackers going to the islands. The walls were thin. The plumbing groaned. Trat was not beautiful. It was functional. It smelled of fish sauce and diesel. The ferry terminal was a rusted skeleton of metal jutting into the brown water. Fern changed in Trat. She was less serene, more anxious. She checked her phone constantly. She spent hours at the local market buying supplies. Rice, oil, baby formula. I asked why she bought baby formula. She said it was for the temple, for the orphans. I carried the bags. I paid the bills. I felt useful. I felt like a provider. One night she came to my room. She was crying. She held a plastic stick in her hand, a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. My stomach dropped. I felt a mix of panic and joy. A child, a legacy, something real to leave behind. She sat on the bed. She wept. She said it was a disaster. She said we were not married. She said her family would shame her. She said she had no money to raise a child. She said she had to make a choice. The trap snapped shut. She did not ask for an abortion. She was too smart for that. She played the devout Buddhist. She said killing the baby would be bad karma. It would ruin her next life. But keeping it would ruin this life. She needed security. She needed sin sod. A dowry to show her village that the father was serious, that I would not run away like the others. She asked for 200,000 baht, not a fortune for the old Jonathan, but a lot for the new one. I looked at her tear-stained face. I looked at the plastic stick. I thought about the emptiness of my life before her. I thought about the code that never worked. I agreed. I told her I would pay. I went to the ATM the next morning. I had to make 3 withdrawals to get the cash. The machine whirred. It spit out the purple notes. I felt the weight of them in my pocket. I felt the sunk cost fallacy gripping my throat. I had gone this far. I could not stop now. If I stopped, I was just a fool who bought bird cages. If I paid, I was a father. I walked back to the guest house. The sun was beating down. The heat was suffocating. I saw Fern near the entrance. She was talking to a woman, a pharmacist from the shop next door. Fern was holding a bag. She looked happy. She looked relieved. I stopped. I did not want to interrupt. The pharmacist laughed. She pointed at Fern's stomach. Fern shook her head and laughed too. I walked past them. Fern saw me. She hid the bag behind her back. She smiled that serene smile. "I go to temple," she said, "to pray for our baby." I nodded. I went to my room. I sat on the bed. Something felt wrong, a glitch in the code. I waited for her to leave. Then I went to the pharmacy. The woman was behind the counter. She spoke little English. I used my phone to translate. I asked her what my girlfriend bought. The woman smiled. She typed into her phone. She showed me the screen. Pregnancy test. I nodded. Yes. She used it yesterday. The woman shook her head. She typed again. She buy 10. Yesterday. Today she buy red ink. Red ink. The world tilted. The heat in the shop spiked. My hands shook. I thanked her. I walked out. I went to the ferry terminal. It was the only place to go. The only place with a view of the road. I waited. An hour later, I saw them. Fern and the cousin. The taxi driver. He was on a motorbike. He waited by the curb. Fern walked up to him. She was not walking like a pregnant woman. She was walking fast. She was eating a mango. She handed him a stack of cash. My cash, the merit money, the baby money. He counted it quickly. He nodded. He kissed her on the cheek. Not a cousin kiss. A lover kiss. Then I saw the child. A boy. About 5 years old. He ran out from the ticket booth. He ran to Fern. He called her Mama. She picked him up. She hugged him. She gave him the bag of supplies. The baby formula. The rice. It was not for orphans. It was for her family. Her real family. The cousin revved the bike. The boy climbed on the front. Fern climbed on the back. They were a unit, a closed circle. I was just the resource they mined to keep the engine running. I stood there in the rain. The water soaked my shirt. It dripped from my nose. She turned her head. She saw me. For a second she looked shocked. Then she smiled. Not the serene smile. A real smile. A human smile. It was almost pity. She waved. Just a small wave. Then the bike sped away. The tires kicked up dirty water. They disappeared into the traffic of Trat. I was alone on the pier. The smell of low tide filled my lungs. The rusty ferry honked its horn. I had paid for the ticket, but I missed the boat. I needed to move. Standing still was dying. The rain was cold now. I walked down the wooden planks to the water. A man sat in a long-tail boat. He was smoking a hand-rolled cigarette. He looked at me with eyes that had seen 1,000 desperate men. I pointed at the horizon. I showed him 500 baht. I did not care where we went. I just wanted to be away from the land where I had buried my common sense. He nodded. He pulled the cord. The engine roared to life. It was a deafening mechanical scream. A tractor engine balanced on a stick. We cut through the gray water. The ferry terminal shrank behind us. The rust and the concrete faded into the mist. I sat on the wooden bench. The spray hit my face. It tasted of salt. We rode for an hour. The driver did not speak. He just looked back at me every few minutes. He checked if I was going to jump. He checked if I was going to be trouble. We passed small islands, green humps rising out of the sea, uninhabited, silent. He cut the engine near a rocky outcrop. The silence rushed in to fill the void. The boat rocked gently. The rain hissed on the surface of the ocean. I looked at the jungle. It was thick and impenetrable. It did not care about my merit. It did not care about my startup. It just existed. I sat there and let the shame wash over me. It was a physical weight. The sunk cost fallacy. I had treated love like a product roadmap. I thought if I just invested enough resources, the feature would ship. If I just paid enough for robes and birds and fake babies, I would get the happy ending. But the product was vaporware. I looked at the driver. "Go back," I said. He nodded. He pulled the cord. We turned around. We arrived back at the terminal as the sun was setting. The sky was a bruised purple. The rain had stopped, but the ground was slick with mud. I walked up the pier. My legs felt unsteady. I needed to get my bag from the guest house. I needed to catch the night bus to Bangkok. I needed to get on a plane and never look at a lotus flower again. I reached the top of the ramp. A crowd had gathered near the ticket booth. People were shouting. A siren wailed in the distance. I tried to walk past. I did not want to see. I just wanted to leave. But the crowd parted, and I saw the motorbike. It was on its side. The plastic fairing was shattered. The mirror was broken off. It had skidded on the wet concrete. A man was kneeling on the ground. It was the cousin, the lover. His football jersey was torn. He was bleeding from his forehead. He was screaming for help. Lying next to him was Fern. She was not moving. Her leg was twisted at a wrong angle. Her white skirt was stained with oil and mud. Her face was pale. Her eyes were open but unfocused. The boy, the real son, was standing there. He was crying. He was tugging at her arm. Mama. Mama. Karma is a wheel. Sometimes it turns slow. Sometimes it spins out on a wet road and trade. I stopped. I stood at the edge of the circle. The cousin looked up. He saw me. His eyes went wide. He recognized the walking wallet, the farang who paid for everything. He scrambled to his feet. He ran to me. He grabbed my shirt. His hands were bloody. "Help!" he shouted. "Hospital, no money, please. She hurt." He pointed at Fern. He pointed at the ambulance that was just pulling in. "Ambulance no take if no pay," he lied. Or maybe he didn't lie. Maybe he just knew how the world worked. "Please, you love her. She have baby." He was still playing the script, even now, even with her leg broken and his head bleeding. He thought the sunk cost would hold. He thought I would pay to save the asset I had invested in. I looked at Fern. She groaned. She saw me, too. She reached out a hand. Her fingers trembled. "John," she whispered. "Help, baby. Baby hurt." She meant the fake baby, the red ink baby. She was doubling down. She was betting everything that I was too weak to walk away. I looked at her leg. It was a bad break. It would need surgery. It would need pins. It would cost 50,000, maybe 100. I looked at the cousin. I saw the greed under the panic. I looked at the boy. He was the only innocent thing here. My hand went to my pocket. I felt the thick roll of cash I had left. The emergency fund. It was enough to fix her leg. It was enough to be the hero one last time. The old Jonathan would have paid. The Jonathan who wanted to be a savior. The Jonathan who thought money could buy redemption. But that Jonathan died on the boat. I looked at the cousin. I removed his bloody hands from my shirt. I did it gently. "I already paid," I said. He looked confused. "What?" "I paid for the baby," I said. "Use that money." He froze. He knew exactly what I meant. The stack of cash she handed him 3 hours ago. The abortion money. The dowry. It was in his pocket. Or maybe he had already spent it on gambling or debt. That was not my problem. "But," he stammered. "You have 200,000, I said. "That buys a lot of doctors." I looked at Fern. She stopped groaning. She stared at me. She saw the change. She saw the firewall go up. "My pen rye," I said. It was the cruelest thing I could say. No problem. It doesn't matter. I turned my back. I walked through the crowd. I heard the cousin shouting at my back. I heard the boy crying. I heard the paramedics loading Fern onto the stretcher. I walked to the guest house. I packed my bag. I walked to the bus station. I bought a ticket to the airport. I sat in the window seat as the bus pulled out of Trat. The town was dark. The rain started again. It streaked the glass. I watched the lights of the ferry terminal fade away. I felt lighter. I had lost money. I had lost time. I had lost a little bit of my soul in that temple. But I had kept the rest. I closed my eyes. I did not pray. I did not make merit. I just slept.